All right, ladies and gentlemen. So far we've talked a lot about the Reformation itself with Luther and Calvin, all that kind of stuff going on, and how the church changed that way. But let's see how the Catholic Church makes a change as well because of the Reformation. We call this the Counter Reformation or Catholic Reformation, and we're going to see some changes in the Catholic Church that occur because of the Reformation things happening in Germany and everywhere else in Europe. Um, so one of the big questions to look at is this Counter Reformation the change from the church is an external or internal pressure? Is something that the actual church figure started, or is something that only happened because guys like Luther and stuff started this Reformation? And I understand that there's been a lot of concern about this for a long time. We go back to the 1300s with John Huss, and John Wycliffe. We see these calls for change in the church, right? And remember that throughout most of his time in Europe, ladies and gentlemen, most of Europe remained pretty Catholic, right? Most of the humanists, still Catholic. Most of the universities, still run by the Catholic Church. Most of the peasants, the lower class, still Catholic. Lutheranism and Protestantism was an urban kind of development. And all of Mediterranean Europe, we're looking at Italy, France, Spain, all still Catholic during this time. So we call this Counter-Reformation, the series of reforms in a response to Protestantism in the 1500s, 1600s that happened. There were early reformers that tried to fix the church, right? Jerome Savonarola, remember the monk who had the bonfire of the vanities. He was, trying to change the church within, burn all the old bad things that were happening, get rid of the paintings, artwork, all that kind of stuff. He was excommunicated, in auto da fede in Florence. Not good for him. But we see the start of religious orders to kind of help fix some of these problems, right? And the biggest one are the Jesuits, also known as the Society of Jesus. Essentially, a group that said, let's take the church's emphasis on spirituality and service, kind of bring it back. Let's be, if you will, like an army for the church and go bring people back and that kind of stuff. And it was started by a guy named Ignatius of Loyola. He was a Basque from northern Spain, and he's a former soldier, right? And he kind of got that whole army of the church thing kind of going for him. And so we see that he uses education as the mean of combating the Reformation. We're going to get a group of people together and focus on educating our people and kind of keep them from going to the Protestant church in the eyes of the Catholic Church. So here's St. Ignatius Loyola, and he was this group of, like I said, the founder of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, and he was a soldier in the Spanish Army. He fought in many wars for the Habsburgs especially, where he was eventually wounded, and he has this conversion, if you will, after he was wounded and when he was recovering from his wounds, and decides to dedicate his life to God. The problem was that when he did the Holy Land, that kind of stuff, the church wouldn't let him be a teacher unless he had some kind of education to himself. So he actually decided to go get an education at the upper level education universities. Alaka he also went to the University of Paris, where at the College of Montaigu as well. And so essentially he went to the same kind of school that Erasmus went to, that John Calvin went to, studied for 7 years, right? And he had this kind of, I guess, he was described as having this magnetic personality to him, that he was very charismatic. It was very easy for him to get followers. And so one of the things he did was he first, in 1534, had 7 companions that joined him on this quest he has. And by the time he dies, he's got over 1,000 people in the Jesuit order. So it's kind of this idea of this big growth he has and that kind of stuff. So Loyola is this founder of the Jesuit order. After he founds this group, he goes to Rome, basically goes to Pope Paul III, and is like, yo, Pope Paul, what can I do for you? And as Pope Paul looked at him, he's like, hey, you know what? There's something here we could possibly use. And so in 1538, we officially had what's called the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuit group, with Loyola being led in as his first general. Here's a little grant here from Ignatius Loyola to go forth and help convert, educate people. So you can see these little grants they were given to people that way. They had a lot of different spiritual exercises. One of the things he did was the thing about this influence of the Renaissance and learning is that he wrote to train Jesuits. So he wrote this handbook of how to teach about the mystical and spiritual properties of Catholicism, spiritual discipline, those kind of things, and how to be essentially a good, better Catholic and not be influenced by the Reformation that's happening. So here we kind of see this painting by Rubens. You kind of see this trance that Loyola is in here, kind of this very mystical, kind of make that spiritual idea really come forward. And one of the things you had when, as a Jesuit was you had to take some very absolute vows, okay? And the biggest vow you took as a Jesuit was the absolute obedience to the Pope. And essentially, whatever the Pope said, you did. And that's kind of was a big part. They also took vows of poverty. It was almost like military and discipline. And this group was very, very popular among men, especially, men only actually, in Europe, among the Catholic faith, and to go around and teach people about the Catholic Church. It really had a lot of influence. So we do see Paul III here. And Pope Paul III was really this big reforming pope, if you will. When he became pope in 1534, after all the Protestant stuff was going on and Leo was out, he did a lot of things. One thing he did was he had a panel of experts to evaluate just how healthy the church, almost like brought in like a consulting team to say that, hey, what's the problem with the church right now? And the panel is like, okay, nepotism, simony, pluralism, absenteeism of popes, just not being around, right? Mismanagement of wealth and immorality. They're like, here, Pope, here's all these problems. Reformers kind of said it already, but it's kind of official this way, I guess, you know what I mean? And so Pope Paul III started doing more things to fix these problems, right? Instead of appointing family and friends and who were going to pay the most for a cardinal spot, he appointed the best person for it. He was really respected for his knowledge, and you got to think he's kind of this piece of Renaissance training and learning that he was educating, evaluating, almost from a like a an objective point of view, saying, okay, instead of who my friends are, it's more about who's the best person for the job. We do have Pope Paul IV as well after the death of Pope Paul III. So one thing that Pope Paul IV did was he used the Inquisition to bring people back. The Inquisition was a powerful tool. We saw the Inquisition in Spain for the Muslims and Jews that were living in Spain at that time. But now we see also Inquisition happen other places as well, whether it be Italy, whether it be Germany, wherever Inquisition spread. So you have torture, you have spying, ideas of terror kind of come here as well to stay in the Catholic faith. So like I said, Italy was big for this, the Spanish Netherlands, so the Dutch areas that were technically under control of Spain, and Spain as well. A few things that Pope Paul did. The biggest thing was called the Index, and the Index was his list of forbidden books. So books that were written by guys like Luther, guys like Calvin, those kind of guys, were forbidden to be read by people. Okay, and so the books that were not approved by him were then burned. So we actually lost some of these books forever because the Pope had them on this index list, and it was one of the ways of making sure that information that went against the church didn't get out to people. Be honest with you, Pope Paul IV didn't really like Loyola, by the way. He kind of had his own way of trying to recruit people, okay, versus the idea of education versus kind of the idea of brute force. So you see lots and lots of differences this way in it. One thing that Pope Paul IV does hold is called the Council of Trent. And it's a big deal in 1545 where the members of the church kind of met at Trent and decided to try and find a way to redefine and reassess and what the church doctrine was and in the Catholic Church. So one of the things that they really looked at was kind of clarified what's the Catholic teaching going to be. They addressed the abuses and corruption of the priests. So originally the priests had their own special courtroom. They didn't get their own special courtroom anymore. Now the priests had to go to the regular courtroom everyone else had to go to. They changed how the training of priests happened. So instead of priest becoming a priest because you can become a priest, there's a formal training you had to go through in Rome to become a priest, those kind of things. Looked at the financial abuse issues, at how money was being spent by the church, and especially in things like art and buildings and cathedrals, all that kind of stuff. And lastly, the biggest one for the Reformation is that the sale of indulgences was abolished. You couldn't sell indulgences anymore anywhere. So here's a little etching. You kind of see the Council of Trent. You see all the cardinals together, experts together, arguing different points of the church. Big thing is that it did reaffirm kind of the basic structure of the church, okay? So the sacraments were still going to be there. Transubstantiation about what communion, what the sacrament was still there, okay? So it didn't necessarily change the church. Maybe try to take away a few of the things that had gone wrong as time went on here. But it was a big moral victory because Catholics look at the church and say, hey, look, we're fixing stuff, right? And so the Catholics in Europe, they were like, hey, this is kind of a good thing. We're fixing the problems. Life is good, and it's getting better that way. And it really kind of fixed a lot of problems that were there. So the liturgy was now uniform. So priests are being trained now. They're being trained in language and literate and all kind of good stuff they weren't doing before. It was now uniform, right? They had an education system kind of set up. Look, this Renaissance influence, right? Education system. And the biggest thing that, especially with Pope Paul IV, is that he did more concordat with the Catholic kings, like he had with Francis before. So now you look at Portugal, Spain, Italy, areas of Italy, Austria, that the papal control kind of went to the local rulers. But that way, they also made it that if you were a Protestant, right, if you were attacking the Catholic Church, it was also attacking the state, and that way treason. So it was one also way of kind of keeping the Protestant movements at bay, if you will, a little bit there. And they did so they had a pledge from the king to support Catholicism in their lands. There are other reforming Catholics at this time too. So, Charles Borromeo was the Archbishop of Milan. He did one of the first schools that actually educate priests. Francis Salé. He was the missionary program, that kind of stuff. So you see the first missionaries develop at this time to go to different places in Europe. You even see women in the church at this time. So you see the biggest would probably be the Carmelite Order by Teresa of Avila. We'll read some stuff for her next week, where it was kind of like the female version of the Jesuits who went out and to teach and educate and that kind of stuff. There was a school for girls that were created by Mary Ward in England. And even things that happened in the church as well as part of this Counter-Reformation. With this, though, there were inquisitions as well. So you had Roman Inquisition in Rome, you had Spanish Inquisition, ideas of torture and spying, all that kind of stuff. And you had Inquisition was trying people for two things. Actually three things, I should say. One was being Protestant. That was one where you could be tried for stuff, which could lead to eventually, if you didn't convert or confess, to be, executed. Also, witchcraft became a big deal this time. That's where you see Malleus Maleficarum write a book called The Hammer of Witches and how to decide what a witch is and who's a witch, and those kind of things coming this way. And so witchcraft would be a big deal here. And lastly, also breaking church law. So if you break church law, you have to confess and those kind of things as part of the Inquisition. So Inquisition was a big deal at this time. With Spanish Inquisition, obviously, it was trying to convert different groups, those Jews and Muslims who were worshiping in secret, yet that kind of stuff was happening. The forbidden books, censoring all other documents, those kind of things going on yet. Still a big deal. One last I want to hit on real quick here before we're done is something called the Baroque. And the Baroque is a change in the artwork of the time. And the Baroque was a type of artwork that was really based in this idea of Counter-Reformation. So it's a really difference from the Renaissance, because you don't have these nice one-point perspective anymore. You don't have this nice soft edges. It's kind of showing a message of people being one with God. And it was very, very spiritual in nature. You see a lot of light being used in these paintings, and the light coming down, is a whole God kind of idea, okay? And you're going to see the people kind of coming towards you, okay, being part of the painting. And so they're kind of bringing the painting almost as a teaching tool to show these ideas, like Lord talked about mysticism, of spirituality, of those kind of ideas. So here's a couple of things looking at here. I lied. No one thing here. A lot of subject matter was about conversions and visions that saints had of God and miracles that took place. You also see martyrdom too. In a way, these paintings are kind of a recruiting tool for the Catholic Church and a teaching tool for the Catholic Church, because people are illiterate, people can't read that kind of stuff. It's a way of almost like a picture book, you will, for the Catholic Church. So the two really famous painters I want to touch on real quick in the last 2 minutes I got with you guys. One is Caravaggio, an Italian painter. Did a lot of his work in the early 1600s. He actually ended up getting a lot of trouble because of his partying lifestyle, and ended up getting a bounty put on his head and get killed at age 38, but that's a whole other story, right? You kind of see the conversion of Paul. So there's that conversion idea where Paul is converted. So you kind of see him here kind of coming out towards you. You see the light here kind of being over him. That'd be the whole God idea, as put that way. Here you see the crucifixion of St. Peter, where he was crucified upside down. So you see kind of coming out towards you, kind of a diagonal perspective almost to it. Kind of everything kind of sliding this way, kind of on this path right here. You see the light being rolled here and kind of the emotion on the face, very hard edge to it. And the light being portrayed right here as St. Peter is being crucified upside down. Same thing. Calling him Matthew, it's the light coming in here. That's the kind of the light of God coming in and showing things about it. One of my favorite artists from this Baroque period is Bernini, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who was a big benefit from the patronage of Rome, did a lot of work for the Roman Catholic Church. And the big thing he did was able to show the emotion and intense states of the conversion, the mysticism, spirituality that's taking place here. So here is his most famous sculpture, The Ecstasy of St. Teresa. And so you see the light coming down and St. Teresa in the trance, seeing God, those kind of things. Here you see David. So you see the emotion on the face of Bernini's David as he's trying to kill the Goliath. You kind of see the idea of where the light shines on him. right? That he's getting help from God that way. Here he has Piazza at St. Peter. So here's St. Peter's Cathedral. He actually designed and built this right here, the Piazza, way to kind of bring in where the Pope would talk. Pope talks from up here, and kind of way to kind of bring this whole idea here of light and